So last panel, documenting and reconstructing losses. It's more of a kaleidoscope of different subjects this time. We start out with a talk on the repercussions of German reunification and the political upheavals around 1990, with all the hopes and the expectations about cultural repatriation and the disappointments that in some cases followed. The second talk is about the critical potential of provenance research within the discipline of art history, which is an interesting and unusual subject that I'm keen to hear more about. The speaker will use exhibitions as examples for an analysis from a scholarly perspective. And the final talk, completely different, takes us into the field of artificial intelligence, where we have a team of speakers focusing on using, well, what is now cutting-edge technology. I hope that's not the wrong thing to say for geeks. This is a team based at the museums in Dresden and Hamburg, and they will take us to the potential which artificial intelligence offers in reconstructing lost artworks. So that's the overview. We start out with my truly distinguished colleague, Uwe Hartmann, who will open the panel. And he is, as our chairman already said in the introduction, easily, I would say, no offense to anybody, but probably the most knowledgeable person on the planet about the subject of cultural property displacement in 20th century Europe. And heaven knows what we will do when he retires. He also warned me that he may overrun with his talk, but he has exciting picture material. So bear with us, and if you have any questions, do pepper him during the reception and during the breaks, because God knows, you might not get the chance again when he goes and takes up golf. So, Uwe Hartmann, welcome, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you. It was too much. In addition to the central political demands for freedom and democracy in the autumn of 1989, the citizens of the GDR, the German Democratic Republic, wanted an explanation of all the events kept secret by the government. The transactions of state foreign trade enterprises, especially with regard to the export of art and antiquities, should be disclosed. Also the export of weapons to regions of war and crisis, the Iraq-Iran war in this time, and it was the depot in the near of Rostock. And you know, all the pictures published by Ulf Bischoff 25 years ago, the depot in Mühlenbeck, Mönchmühle, in the north of Berlin. One of the taboo subjects in the GDR was also the question of the whereabouts of art and cultural assets in the Soviet Union, after a large number of artworks, books and archives had been handed over to the government in East Berlin by the end of the 1950s. In 1950 Dresden, 1958 Berlin, and 1985 the forced anniversary of the liberation. And I was one of the students of the Berlin Humboldt Universität. We were guides in this exhibition, and we have to reproduce the legends and the talks and the breaks with the staff members of the Berlin museums. That was the moment we got the truth, or we got the questions about the whereabouts. And of course, from our view, older colleagues like Gisela Hase, if you can Russian, Gisela Rudolph, staff members of the Dresden or Berlin museums, they were in the Soviet Union in the 1950s, 1958, and they know and can't talk about. They know what remains in the museums. I think every of my teachers from the generation of our teachers, they were as students in the Soviet Union and then as staff members were in the Soviet Union. Everybody reported that in the evening after drinking, the Soviet colleagues said, "Come into the depot." And they were shown the paintings from Dresden, Gotha, Leipzig. And it must be remembered at this point that it was not until 1986 and 1988 that an agreement was reached between the two German states on the return of cultural assets that had been relocated as a result of the war. And the problem was the status of the foundation Stiftung Preußischer Kulturbesitz and the contradiction of the principles. Always in that time, in the negotiations between East and Western Germany, it's the same problem all the years later between Germany and Poland, or the governments between Germany and Poland. The Stiftung Preußischer Kulturbesitz never should be discriminated by the GDR government. It was a result of this declaration. Another important issue that was placed on the political agenda at the end of the GDR's existence was the question of compensation for the Jewish victims of National Socialist persecution by the Second German State. You can see Edgar Bronfman, it was a problem for him to get the medal, the order from Erich Honecker. But in the end of the 80s, the political leaders in the GDR remembered, some of them remembered that he came from Jewish families as well, they were communists, and they sent a high politician, Hermann Axen, to the United States to make the negotiations with the Jewish Claims Conference and the Jewish World Conference. The problem, Hermann Axen didn't speak English. And then, important, the last government in the GDR under Premier de Maizière makes the basics of law for restitution, like the same laws in Western Germany in the 1950s, and this was overtaken into the Treaty of the German Reunification. But in the process of achieving German unity in 1990, there were fears that the validity of certain paragraphs of the occupation law will continue. Accordingly, all confiscations of German property, including art and cultural assets, which took place through the application of laws of the military governments before and after the capitulation of Germany, are considered final. It was the famous Klaus Goldmann. He wrote in the foreword to Walter Farmer's Safekeeping, or Safekeepers, he formulated these fears. However, the focus was on the reorganization of relations between the now reunified Germany and its eastern neighbors, following the collapse of the Soviet Union. All these treaties, all the agreements included the wording that the other side, or they want to search each other for cultural goods of the territorium of the other partner of cooperation. Then the first years, I think I remember, they were years of hope, of transparency, of cooperation, especially in that time when Russian museums and libraries published the trophy books, the trophy paintings, and of course in Germany it's our own history, the most of you know it. It was the typical German political problem. Foreign policy is a task of the Foreign Office, but we have the famous Kulturhoheit der Länder. And of course, the Länder, all the new Mecklenburg, Saxony, Saxony-Anhalt, Thuringia, and of course Bremen and Hamburg said in the beginning of the 90s, we have cultural losses in the Soviet Union, but I think the politicians and the staff of the Foreign Office in Bonn have no idea what they mean in special. And so in 1994, the Coordination Office, Koordinierungsstelle der Länder für die Rückführung von Kulturgütern, was founded in Bremen. And since 1998, the office worked in Magdeburg. And of course, the well-known, the Lost Art database was created for the documentation of the wartime losses of the German museums, libraries, and archives. And then we saw in 2001 and 2, I think, when I remember right, oh yeah, Lost Art are you? And in the first time, there were also what we called found reports in lost art.de, also found reports we can read or research on this Russian database. I was the last time in the palace as a tourist in 2017, and I came in the palace and there were an exhibition because the longtime director Zautov was died, and you can see I was surprised. I see Wolfgang Eichwede in one of these photos in the palace in Caesuras. In that time, the surprise that in the meeting of the ministers, the Russian president came and spoke with you always. I think it was in that time a moment of hope. Most of the colleagues in Germany thought, okay, if the Russian president in person sees the problems, then the solutions are soon possible. But you have always mentioned latest in the year of the war to give the cultural property from the former enemy states, Germany, Hungary, Romania, to the property of the Russian Federation. It was the end of the negotiations between Germany and Russia. The years of optimism and hope were followed by years of stagnation and failure. For years, a breakthrough was expected in the negotiations between Germany and the Russian Federation, the Republic of Poland and Ukraine. For reasons of time, I would like to give you an almost uncommented overview of the milestones in the development of the past 30 years. Olaf and I remember negotiations between Germany and Ukraine in the Levadia Palace on the Isle of Crimea. Conclusion of this treaty or agreement never realized, only this, the publication of the wartime losses of museums and libraries from Ukraine in the German Lost Art database. I think, Frau Rübczek, you were always in the room in Magdeburg. I'm not sure who made the photo, Olaf or Regine Denel. You can see me 20 years, 25 years younger. After the failure of political and diplomatic efforts, professional and scientific cooperation became all the more important. The same, the expecting breakthrough when the Polish president made a proposal in Potsdam in 1999 when he said, next year we should find a solution of the so-called Belinka. After then, he crushed in Polish and German domestic policy. This is an old fax what the Koordinierungsstelle received, Polish press articles and the German translation that we understand what were the topics of the Polish political discussion in these years. And then Poland wanted to become a member of the European Union, and there were political forces, groups of interests in Germany. They said, if they want come to the European Union, before that happened, they should give back all the cultural assets. It was a very complicated situation and very controversial political debates. And so that more important became the professional and scientific cooperation. The Copernicus Group was founded, and you can read in German the frustration of the colleagues from universities and institutes because politicians in both states in Poland and in Germany made no steps forward. And also the Arbeitskreis Deutsch-Polnische Kunsthistoriker Working Group, Polish-German art historians. Our topic, the relocation, the repatriation of cultural property, was on the agenda of the meetings in 2002 and 2003 and 2004. So I saw, and I give this what it was a headline in the time, gegenseitige Taubheit, reciprocal deafness, created by Nawojka, Czyslinska, Lobkowitz. Then leading staff members or directors of German museums in Potsdam, Berlin, and Dresden said in an interview for a great paper in Germany, the German politics is failed. State Minister Weiss was not amused in that time, but the alternative to the situation on the political and diplomatic relations were the founding of the Russian-German Museums Dialogue and, Olaf, the Russian-German Bibliotheks Dialogues. The last meeting in 2019 on the other side in the Posolstwo Ambassador. Some very interesting workshops, conferences were held here in Moscow. You can always see again Wolfgang Eichwede, if you remember the man that was I in that time. And on Los Adru, the report about this conference is available. You can read it if you can read Russian. Gilbert Lupfer, Uwe Hartmann, Wolfgang Eichwede. It's now available. 2011, in the so-called special archives in Moscow, no restrictions. Colleagues from Germany, France, United States, Belgium, Christian, you can see it. We could see everything of the documents, of the objects in the so-called special archive in Moscow. Very interesting, the guest book of the Führerkanzlei, the 55th birthday of Adolf Hitler, and the last guest, Heinrich George. After the Russian attacks against Ukraine, you know, in German, auf Eis gelegt, all activities of this initiative were stopped. The last restitution, or the last moment when a high politician, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, give back object, it was in 2014, this little painting by Guardi. And I think it's a typical for the political phrases. It was one conversation after years of Gegenseitigkeit, and we are happy that our cultural good dialogue will continue. And so it was again a sign of hope that in the last July, after a long interruption, the German and the Polish government also came together to a meeting, and they also talk about our topics, the wartime losses of the museums and bibliotheks on both sides. And on the Instagram or LinkedIn account of the Polish ministry, you could read more information than on the side of Claudia Roth. My conclusion, cases like these. Some months ago, a man wrote me an email and asked for help and support. I think one of these three boys, it's a photo in 1945, he got a mail from a man from Russia. This man from Russia has possession of this certificate of his grandfather. Emperor Wilhelm II made his grandfather to a nobleman. Then, to the end of the war, the family, of course, has gone to the west. The city now is on the Polish territory, but a man in Russia has this certificate. And he wanted to give back, but the Russian authorities did not issue an export permit because this historical document was created before 1945. But it was never a Russian cultural asset or document. It was a German document in a German city, now on a Polish state. Who can help? Who can give support in these times, in times of renewed confrontation? Maybe we find some ideas in the evening discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, we actually do have time for questions. We have exactly 3.5 minutes. So feel free.
Manchmal können wir auch anders.
And I must say, it is always really brave to take on a complicated subject in a language that one does not much use. So, extra points, I would say. But we can. I mean, if nobody has any questions, then we would just continue.
I can add something.
Yes, Herr Voiker.
At first, it is fun to see, let's say, everything where I was inside from the beginning. I mean, from 1991 by the signing of Polish-German relation about good relations, neighborhood relations, and then at the first negotiations of a German-Polish group about, let's say, Rückführung der verbrachten Kulturgüter. This is the name, the calling, the diplomatic name of, let's say, our cases. As you know, Uwe, 90s go under the Sprichwort Beutekunst. These are the 90s. The NS-Raubkunst, Nazi looted art, this has started with the, let's say, around 1998 and Washington Principles. So 90s, this go under this this Beutekunst description, and of course, especially bilateral relations, Polish, German, Russian, German, and so on and so on. So this is interesting. But what I want to say, I will speak about it a little bit at the discussion, but what I want to say, that the only official, and the last one, painting, which was restituted to Warsaw, to the National Museum in Warsaw, which was really looted by Mühlmann for Hitler and then for Franke in 1939, 1940. This was a painting which was by mistake taken from Fishborn to Heidelberg, I suppose. And then, thanks Uwe, it was identified as the looted object from the Polish Warsaw National Museum. And he already spoke about it in 2002, I suppose, or 2003, at this meeting of Polish-German art historian circle. And we had to wait because of the, narrow-minded politics from both sides till 2014 to have it in Warsaw.
Thank you. Aha.
Yeah, I think what is important, the conference Spoils of War in 1995. In that time, all wartime losses. And after the Washington conference, especially in Germany, we have to divide it and to make the difference between what Navolka said, wartime losses, kriegsbedingt verlagert, and Nazi-looted, NS-verfolgungsbedingt. Olaf, again.
Thank you. In one of your slides, you showed the headlines, "Experts dissatisfied with policy." Could you imagine that this could have been a headline for the whole conference today?
We are living for the alternative possibilities that we have as scientifics, as museum staff members. It's easy to say, the politicians, but we have to make our work. And there are so many fields, so many questions after 80 years, and we have to do our work. And of course, then Politiker aller Länder vereinigt euch.
Great. Well, I think we can do. Yes, please.
Thank you for this almost a personal account of the last decades, and my question would go into these lines, taking an opportunity of having you with us before the retirement. I'm just curious, what would you say, what was the biggest achievement, success of the foundation, but also the biggest disappointment and the failure, if you could look at those years in retrospective? So what would you tell about that?
I think for me, a moment of happiness was when I researched in the Bundesarchive, and I found all the documents of the Generalgouverneur Franke and Mühlmann. You can read all the papers in the Bundesarchiv with a joke, the plans for new buildings of the Generalgouvernement in Bavaria, then the Soviet army is in front of Berlin. And of course, when you have the line, it's a moment of happiness. Then, the years later, it was a situation Chancellor Schröder said in the beginning of the years after 2000, no more efforts, only one-way efforts from Germany. And that's why in the Foreign Office they have the knowledge, they have the information about the fate of the history of the Goade-Gemälde, and of course then it was relocated for better, there were better conditions in the Staatsgalerie Stuttgart. And in 2004 or 2005, I really don't remember, the Prime Minister of Poland were in Germany and they visited Stuttgart. And the Prime Minister of Baden-Württemberg had a great idea. I will give this painting to the Polish colleague. But Berlin said no. And yeah, so the good moments and the bad moments are often near.
Yeah. Well, if I may, could Konstantin Akinci keep his comment for the next break? Because I'd like to, or is it, does it have to? Does it have to be? Yeah? Okay, I did see you. Thank you very much. Our next speaker takes us away from politics and its repercussions and into the academic field. Marlen Katz is preparing a doctorate at the University of Jena, and her research subject is the relationship between art history and provenance research, which is still, to this day, a slightly uneasy partnership sometimes. Marlen Katz is part of the research group on displaced heritage of the Leo Baeck Institute in Jerusalem and the Leibniz Institute on Jewish History in Leipzig. She trained first as a carpenter, if I may say, but she was inspired by a talk held by Iris Schmeisser, and I can completely understand that, having heard Iris Schmeisser yesterday, to take up provenance research. And so there we are. Marlen Katz, welcome.
Thank you for the kind introduction. And first of all, thank you for having me here, and many thanks for organizing this wonderful conference. After all these inspiring lectures, often deep down in the archival work, I'm now pleased to present the methodological approach I'm developing in my PhD project in the field of art history. The current edition of the German Lost Art Foundation's magazine, Provenance und Forschung, about the year 1945, is illustrated with this photo, here on the left. It's a shot of the exhibition Wieder zurück in Gotha, Back in Gotha, conceptualized by Timo Trümper, which was on display from October 2021 to August 2022 at Schloss Friedenstein, the Museum of the Thuringian City of Gotha. You can see a gallery of frames: golden, black, wooden, oval, rectangular, upright and transverse, richly decorated or simply designed. These frames hang on another frame-like construction of blue lacquered and narrow metal supports. The entire construction is transparent, with frames of frame-like elements layered on top of each other, next to each other, or behind each other. They allow us to gaze through them onto the paintings hanging on the wall in the background, while also obstructing our view. By hanging the frames in the middle of the room, they became a sculpture of their own right and allow the visitor to look at them from different angles to see their front and back. Even without a clue what the exhibition itself was about, we get the impression that these were complex, multi-layered, overlapping processes and circumstances. We see loss and empty spaces. At the same time, the museum seems to be dealing with these gaps, and we as visitors seems to participate in these processes. And indeed, nothing less than the history of the museum's collection was the subject of the exhibition, telling its story from the collection's princely foundation to its dissolution during the Second World War and the looting of the library collection by the Soviets in 1946. The exhibition put particular emphasis on the spectacular criminal case of 5 paintings that were stolen once more in 1979 after they returned from the Soviets in the late 1950s. Only in 2019, the 5 precious paintings returned to the collection. As many in this room know from their own day-to-day work, such a complex story demands curatorial innovation. New storytelling is tested and exhibited, and visitors are encouraged not to shy away from centuries of multi-layered historical events. The task to display the results and the working processes of provenance research poses a certain problem for object-based museums. The facts and results of this research are mostly not visible, of course, in the objects themselves, the paintings, sculptures, or any other work of art or cultural object. Therefore, many innovative concepts have been developed for these exhibitions in the space between historical and art historical work. We all remember, for example, Ute Haug's idea of turning paintings over and showing the reverse side, 2004-2005 at Hamburger Kunsthalle. In these exhibitions, an encounter between the institution and its collection is taking place. Of course, these two, the institution and the collection, cannot really be separated, or the one is even the definition for the other. The impression arises that an institution thus looks at itself in the mirror, with us visitors standing right beside them, looking into the same mirror. A situation at the Museum for Applied Arts in Frankfurt am Main illustrates this point. In the exhibition, the collection of Maximilian von Goldschmidt-Rothschild, January to June 2023, curated by Museum Director Matthias Wagner-Kahr and provenance researcher Katharina Weiler, they displayed this enlarged historical photograph of a mirror. The exhibition reconstructed the collection mentioned in the title in order to commemorate the owner's expropriation by the Nazis. Since the museum itself, under another name back then, profited a lot from the injustice committed by the Nazi regime through the expansion of the collection and even the use of the Rothschild Palais as an exhibition space, the mirror metaphorically reflects on this special context too. We have to look at the exhibitions as a medium intended to have a public impact, a medium besides others, like publications or conferences like ours today. So how do museums rewrite their own history and establish new narratives through exhibitions featuring provenance research? Can we understand exhibitions about provenance research as a critical intervention in museum practices in the field of art history in general? To me, it seems that there's kind of a tension or even a contradiction between the interest of provenance research and the interest of the institution or collection that hosts or pays the provenance researcher. Or at least it can be, especially when it comes to restitutions. How can we describe this tension? How are the institutions and its players dealing with it in each unique case? Is this contradiction perceived as such, or is it just a small part of a bigger system in the already contradictory museum network in which each actor has different needs in order to do their respective work in the best possible way? In order to describe the get-together of provenance research and other collectors or museums' work, I want to think about provenance research as a form of critique, reflecting on the opportunities and extensions that provenance research provides. More precisely, looking at the institutions, museums, and/or collections, I wondered in which relation provenance research stands to the field of institutional critique. There was, and sometimes still is, the accusation leveled by art historians against provenance research at its core to be merely positivist and empiricist, and also that it can be politically controlled and instrumentalized. Rejecting this critique as an art historian myself, I propose to look at the methods of provenance research in a different way. Provenance researchers are not only researching facts and building data banks, although this is of course a particularly important historical work, don't get me wrong at this point. Students of art history benefits greatly from learning the skills of archival works if provenance research is a part of their curriculum. It is more than helpful to develop a competence to face the historical aspect in art history. So my PhD project will look at another extra. Provenance research adds to the discipline of art history, exploring provenance research, its approaches and methods coming from and being connected with the humanities, in order to show its potential as a method of critique. I therefore draw on Max Horkheimer's famous essay on traditional and critical theory. Horkheimer differentiates critical theory from traditional theory by attributing a productive and changeable power to it. The intellectual goes from purely describing conditions over criticizing them to changing them. Can provenance research be understood as a critical theory in Horkheimer's sense? Precisely as an approach of critical art history, in what way? While Horkheimer's text has more like a symbolic meaning for me today, several current scholars appear to be thinking along similar lines. Christian Fuhrmeister recently called provenance research art history's guilty conscience. Or Lynn Rother, who described provenance research as art history's doppelganger in reference to Freud's psychoanalysis. Or Benedikt Savoy's encouragement of a productive introspection, produktive Innenschau. Also in the attempt to take Gilbert Lupfer's thoughts he formulated back then to 2013 further, that provenance research was ignored by left-wing art history at all, I would like to consider how to combine Jutta Held and Norbert Schneider's socio-historical approach with ideas and methods from provenance research. I claim that in-depth exhibition analysis are particularly suitable for approaching the question of the connection and cross-fertilization between art history, provenance research, and the approaches of critical theory. Therefore, I visited over 30 exhibitions in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland from 2022 to 2025 in order to get an overview. I decided to take exemplary exhibitions which are especially fruitful for my research question and will write about 10 deep analysis. For my methodical procedure, I have to mention that I consciously adopt a visitor's perspective, but to be honest, one with a certain amount of prior knowledge. I look at the displays as an art historically trained and interested visitor, but consciously without being too close to the thoughts and processes of the exhibition organizers, curators, and teams. Mostly comparable to the perspective of a theater critic during the premiere, who writes an article after a single, intensive evening at the theater, supplemented by the discourse that she knows and of which she herself is a part, without knowing all the stage directions or even all the symbolic meanings which are used. Each exhibition raises different questions. I want to tap out the moments of critique that are shown or maybe sometimes only suggested or even ignored in each exhibition, meaning the potential critique of the institution itself, its collection, the established exhibition practices, and the questioning and perspective of art history and the museum system. I sort the actual exhibition situations which I encountered in 4 categories of moments of critique, which of course can stand side by side in an individual exhibition too. First, visualized disorders such as fractures, cracks in their treatment, empty spaces, and showing absence. Exemplary on the slide is the inspiring exhibition Cassaway Modernism at Kunstmuseum Basel, October 2022 to February 2023, curated by Eva Reifert and Tessa Rosebrock. The painting Tierschicksale, Fate of the Animals by Franz Marc in 1913, which was badly damaged in a fire and was famously restored after Marc's death by his friend Paul Klee, was used as a symbolic fracture. Here on the left, on the catalogue's cover, where the painting's wound has remained graphically open. Empty spaces, which can be described as an interruption to the narrative flow of the exhibition, were also illustrated, for example, with the projection of Otto Dix's missing work, Witwe, from 1925, besides others. If you are interested in an analysis of empty spaces on display in general, I would like to refer you to the research of PhD candidate Emilia Krellmann from TU Dresden, who places this aspect at the center of her research. Second moment of critique, situations of self-reflection, like in exhibited mirrors, exhibiting the exhibiting, or showing of museums' inner workings, for example, in the presentation of sensitive materials from their own archive. Allow me to return to the example of the exhibition in Frankfurt am Main, where both these aspects were shown. The photographed, and as such of course blind, but even more symbolic, mirror, and the recreation of the historical National Socialist exhibition situation. Third moment of critique, changing the perspective, such as getting another perspective as a visitor through, for example, technical accessoires, or the art object itself being presented as a subject, or even the complete distortion of historical reality. On the left, you can see a situation at Humboldt Forum Berlin, in highly polished and very purple Loot 10 stories on display from March 2024 to January 2025. The visitor could use VR classes which should catapult him or her in the historical situation where an actual theft has happened. On the right, you can see the artist Walid Rath in action, performing at the Hamburger Kunsthalle in 2023. Walid Rath, Cotton Under My Feet, the Hamburg chapter, was not based on the museum's provenance research, of course, but was very interesting due to the question of narrative perspective. Here it also stands in for the field of artistic research, which I look on too. Fourth, moments of avant-garde, referring to the thesis of Austrian art historian Anna Schober. As avant-garde exhibition strategies or such of critique, she named irony, montage, alienation, or rupture. According to Schober, back in the 1960s to 80s, curators used this kind of trendy strategies in relation to Walter Benjamin's shock or Bertolt Brecht's Verfremdungseffekt, distancing effect. Benjamin's idea of shock, meaning interrupting and disrupting the narrative flow, fits in my own first category of disorders, fractures, and cracks. While we can find distancing effects all over my analytical consideration, especially in self-reflection and changing the perspective. I was also able to find strategies such as alienation or irony in the exhibitions I'm dealing with, but without conscious recourse to Benjamin or Brecht, as far as I can tell. Exemplary here, the exhibition, The Journey of the Paintings, on display from March to September 2024 at Lentos Museum Linz, in context of the European Capital of Culture, and curated by Elisabeth Nowak-Thaler and Birgit Schwarz. Especially the prominent placement of a contemporary art of artist Henrike Naumann in the very center of the large exhibition space, consisting of wildly assembled pieces of furniture from decades of German history, many of which can be labeled with terms such as ugly or kitschy, brings an ironic, unsettling atmosphere into the room. While, for example, the kind of upside-down Petersburger Hängung of craned oil paintings of the 19th century showing wild landscapes of farmers' wedding seems to be an attempt to alienate and as strategies of overpowering. I would like to conclude with a most recent example from Zurich. 2 weeks ago, I went to A Future for the Past, the Börle collection, which runs till November 2025 at Kunsthalle Zurich. I was impressed by an incredible number of researched facts, stunned by beautiful art and richness, of course, but drove home with a thoughtful head. Something had happened in Zurich that caused my entire question to falter, and at the same time, or precisely because of this, strengthened me as much as possible. By integrating the existing criticism of the collection in the exhibition itself, further criticism of the museum's handling of the Börle collection becomes almost impossible. The curators display newspapers, reviews of critics, videos, interviews with critics and friends of the collection, and also the feedback of visitors from today. Current critical voices were historicized and musealized and inscribed in the tenor. As thus, criticism itself became part of the collection's narrative and integrated into it. In the end, we realize that the great contradiction of institutional critique is also reflected in the exhibitions I'm dealing with. The great contradiction is that institutionalizing institutional critique is both impossible and desirable at the same time. So far at this point, I have been able to shed a light on the critical potential of provenance research and on a possible expansion of art historical methodology through the questions posed by provenance research. And now I'm happy to hear questions and thoughts, and thank you very much for your attention.
Well, if I understood you correctly, it's that provenance research has the potential to put the cat among the pigeons in the museums, and in a good way.
Yes, and especially for the art history in the universities. That is my great hope. Yeah.
Okay. Comments, questions? Yes, I thought you might be Christian Fuhrmeister.
Thank you very much. I would like to linger a moment on the notion of critique, because this is new, but at the same time, it's also, in a way, I'd like to phrase it, self-evident, because we're looking at two things that are needed to be explored and investigated, and one is translocation, and the other is change of ownerhood. Both, by definition, are, let's say, against the grain, because they are, if we are in the present right now, those are the things that are not visible, and by investigating, something is uncovered. So I wonder if critique is not, by definition, part of the job already, as it is, let's say, against the genetic disposition of celebrating what is in front of you, in front of your eyes. So it is looking beyond, looking behind, in all. So is this really a new thing, or is it, let's say, a fundamental task of provenance research per se, already and always from the beginning?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's both of them. It is, of course, why we are facing our environment and facing the archivals and so on. We are doing critical work, and our U.S. provenance researchers especially do critical work. But it is that's why I came with the good old Max Horkheimer. It is that there is some kind of a tradition of critical theory in the humanities, at least. And I thought about connecting this tradition with the very own job of the provenance researcher. And I think that we can connect this methodologically, because as I mentioned, the critique means not only to criticize, maybe in a mostly all days kind of meaning of this word, so to say it's good or bad or I don't know or something, but to mean critical handling with for example, provenance research archival or something like that, is also to change the status quo. And that is, of course, another or a thing I want to add. And I know that it is maybe a little bit confusing because I use the word critique maybe in two different styles. I want to make some exhibition critique, of course, in the way that I want to write deep down analysis, but also I need the critical phrase to describe my methodological approach. So I will use the critique also as the shape and the content. So as I would say in German, as the Form und der Inhalt, shape and the content of my work. So it is both of it. Yeah, it is evident, and of course it is also new. Yeah.
We had another question or comment.
Okay.
Thank you, Marlen. I was wondering if you have looked in the history of the museum's history. So if you found some references to older institutional critique that can be compared with the institutional critique of the provenance researchers, or if it's just like a unique and very new phenomenon, or if you intend to do it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and that's a very big field, museums history. I looked at it, but not as far as I want to, because I'm in the middle of my process right now. And I want to especially to look at the exhibition history, not in the museum history. I think that is even more fruitful for me. And therefore I came across with the work of Anna Schober, this art historian from Austria, and she also says that this is a traditional, a very clear traditional, especially very trendy back then in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we can imagine this, that this is very trendy to say, wow, we are so critical and so on and so on. And so I want not romanticizing this decade, but I want to look at it, if we can maybe learn from it, or not we in this, but I can learn words and can use the thoughts in the 60s to 80s, for example, to make my approach even more convincing. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, okay, you're welcome. Thank you.
We have a trio of speakers for the last contribution in this panel. And we are going to the technical forefront of museum work here. We have Clara Blomeyer, who is based at Hamburger Kunsthalle, studied art history and cultural anthropology. We have Martin Zavesky and Jakob Franke, one of whom, Jakob Franke that is, joins us remotely. They are both employed at the Staatliche Kunstsammlung in Dresden, and one is the digital strategy officer, that's Martin Zavesky, and the other one is the digital curator. So they will be talking about a project that they all have been working on for some time, which involves, as I said, artificial intelligence. Welcome very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Deriving from the massive attention the Romanticist painter Caspar David Friedrich received in 2024, which was his 250th birthday, came an interest also in his lost artworks. As a starting point, our team of Staatliche Kunstsammlungen Dresden and Hamburger Kunsthalle studied the potential of AI-supported image reconstruction using the example of two works by Caspar David Friedrich that were burned in Munich's Glaspalast in 1931. To train the AI model, we used image data provided by the web portal cdfriedrich.de, brought out by a collaboration of Dresden, Hamburg, and the Staatliche Museen zu Berlin. In today's presentation, we want to take a closer look at two wartime losses of the former Dresden Gemäldegalerie, today Albertinum, by Caspar David Friedrich. Two hikers on the beach purchased in 1937 from the legacy of J.F. Lahmann, and resting during the hay harvest, which was among the first ever acquisitions of Friedrich's work by a museum in 1840, the year of his death. To be precise, we will be focusing only on a certain image section of the paintings, the skies. This has not only technical reasons, but also grounds within Friedrich's oeuvre. I will go into this later on. When it comes to a machine-based reconstruction of human intelligence-created artworks, the study of historical sources is indispensable. We focused on image descriptions in inventories, catalogues raisonnés, exhibition catalogues, but also museum image archives. The painting of the two hikers, dated around 1817, is only poorly documented. The most informative source is the catalogue raisonné of the paintings by Carl Wilhelm Jäning and Helmut Börsch-Supan. The painting style of cat number 225 is closely related to this painting. Thematically, it is close to cat number 221 and 225. The motif of the wanderers ties in with the monk by the sea, the crumbling dolmen's grave in front of the sea, and so on. And he follows with a lot of interpretations what it might be, but we are not focusing on the reception of Friedrich's paintings today. So, what do we learn here? We learn mostly about the motifs and about related artworks from Friedrich's oeuvre, such as Neubrandenburg and Monk by the Sea. Such comparisons are crucial for our reconstruction project. This allows us to better compare the calculated results with the original and other existing works in the search of an image that is as realistic as possible and comes as closest to the original as possible. If the reproduction of the painting is only of low resolution that we are using as a starting point, or it lacks high contrast to distinguish details, a detailed description, as which we all just heard, can also be interesting to distinguish. A look at the works mentioned, however, shows that their relatedness can be of a very different nature in terms of motif, atmosphere, or composition, for example. In the juxtaposition, it is sometimes hard to tell where the similarities lie, as with Two Hikers and Neubrandenburg. Possible could be because of a similar upward movement in the clouds or similar color. A discussion I want to add one nota bene on Friedrich's clouds, which later on would be a little bit difficult in the reconstruction process. A discussion with Goethe in 1816 makes it clear that Friedrich was not interested in a scientifically correct representation of nature, especially of cloud forms. After Friedrich, nature could not be forced, eingezwängt, into distinct terms such as cirrus, cumulus, and so on. Keep this in mind when we come to the terminology of training the AI model. The sources for resting are much better, not least because the work was represented at the epoch-making German centenary exhibition in Berlin in 1906. In the exhibition catalogue, Julius Meyer-Graefe described the painting under the impression of Impressionism, with a focus on the colors. I will skip to the cloud and sky part. The horizon begins with strong violet, kräftiges Violett, clouds from which the bright orange, leuchtendes Orange of the evening sky emerges. This gradually fades into light blue. The description of Börsch-Supan-Jenning again offers related artworks and possible pendants, such as Neubrandenburg in Flames, which is of the exact same format. There we have it. And a very similar composition is also unfinished. You can see it in the Hamburger Kunsthalle if you want to. He further writes, the haystacks also are prepared in summer landscape with dead oak. We also have colleagues from Weimar here. If we look at these three pictures mentioned by Börsch-Supan, we can see how the sky played a key role in Friedrich's compositions throughout his entire creative period. A scientist friend of his, Gotthelf Heinrich von Schubert, subsequently noted in 1855 that Friedrich did not paint a landscape, but rather an airscape, Landschaft, sondern vielmehr eine Luftschaft. Moreover, the sky is, in its multitude of colors, becomes the central mood carrier in the picture, in which Friedrich was able to convey all possible moods through a delicately graduated palette of colors. Within this, the color becomes the carrier of meaning par excellence. Characteristic for Friedrich are the complementary contrasts, which were unusual in his time. Here, for example, orange and violet. Meyer-Graefe also emphasized this contrast. As Holger Birkholz has shown, Friedrich was already during his lifetime known for his preference of the color violet. Having in mind Meyer-Graefe's colorful text speaking of the horizon's strong violet clouds and bright orange, the contemporary colored reproduction of 1942 astounds. Still, we felt the urgency of including it into our AI-supported reconstruction project. Now, my colleague Jakob Franke will tell you more about the training process based on the historical research.
Yes, thank you. I hope you can hear me and maybe even see me. Bonjour from Paris, and many thanks to the organizers and technicians for making it possible to be part of this, although I can't be there in person. So yeah, thank you very much. But let's get straight to the matter. I hope this won't be too hurried because it might be a lot. Yeah, so we've seen there are black and white, and in one case there's even a colored reproduction of the two Friedrich paintings. But our experiment aimed to use AI to give us glances of what they could have looked like in color. To do this, we have trained a so-called LoRa model. This is a minor supplementary model that can be trained to meet specific requirements. It is connected to a pre-trained main model, which is very complex and a very black box, trained with unknown masses of images and descriptions from the internet, so you don't know what's in them. LoRa models instead add a known part to these pre-trained models and are often used, for example, to teach the AI knowledge of a specific face to then use this face in image generation. In our case, however, it wasn't about faces, but about the skies in Caspar David Friedrich's paintings. Friedrich's skies are not only significant from an art scientific perspective, but in the context of this project also in a more literal sense with regard to their describability. That is important as in order for certain outcomes to be more likely than others, a common language is needed in which AI and humans agree upon what is likely to be a desirable outcome for the image generation. To generate such outcome, images and also descriptions of these images are given and learned in the training process as a correlation that is ultimately recorded in the model as a probability rule. In a way, this is a continuation of what Max Bense and the small group of computer artists were already doing in the 1960s. Bense aimed for a description of art that could be interpreted by a computer, and so he got to an understanding of aesthetic production as a series of decision-making. The rules of the decision-making were handed over to a computer as a code. What makes current image generation technology different is above all the complexity of the models that are now being used and therefore the decisions. We don't need to write a code anymore, and the models now are capable of producing very complex and photorealistic images. But at the same time, the process of how these probabilities are calculated eludes us, just as it eludes us what is actually part of the model and to what extent. This is different with LoRa models, but ultimately they only add a controllable part to what is actually a much more extensive and less known model that lies beneath it, which in our case was Stable Diffusion 1.5. So we use these models to create an unequal probability that the computer will, for example, place a color at a certain point and, at least in our case, ideally make a decision that Caspar David Friedrich is likely to have made. However, because the realization of these decisions is an interplay of a twofold process, namely, on the one hand, the training, and on the other hand, the moment in which the decision is actually made, the description of the training data is just as important as the prompt with which it can later be realized. That is why these black box models can be a problem. For the LoRa training, the images must be described in an effective way and meaningful frame. Because if you want to describe all the details of, for example, Greifswald Harbor that you can see here, in a way that AI can use the descriptions for a decision-making aid, you will quickly realize that this process can be continued indefinitely. How many ships can be seen here? Where in the picture are they located? Where in the space are they located? What is ship and what is a boat? What kind of hats are the people wearing? Where does the coast run along? And so on and so forth. So in short, you are not going to get to an end. And while we haven't even introduced any symbolism or moods that can be associated with all these things. And we also haven't mentioned the fact that these elements vary completely over different paintings. So while there is a lot of detail, describing it might not actually help us in generating a credible colorization of the painting on the right. Next file, please. Skies, on the other hand, are something that can be described well. They usually have few colors, occupy large areas of the paintings, and they are, at least in Friedrich's works, not only present in almost all paintings, but also very prominent. They are always at the top, and they consist of the same elements, sky and clouds, and maybe a moon or a sun. In aiming exclusively for the skies, we were able to limit ourselves to a manageable series of questions for the training data, which we applied to the 64 training images in order to be able to provide as systematic a description as possible for the basis of our training. You can see this here using 3 examples. That's the next page. First, each description was given a few identical basic elements, such as our trigger word, CDF Sky 1, which can be used, which can use to make the relationship to our LoRa model explicit in the later prompt. And in addition, the name Caspar David Friedrich, oil painting as an art form and as a medium, and 19th century were attached. All the other parts of the descriptions are related to the sky, answering our basic set of questions, like how cloudy is the sky, which colors does it have, and so on and so forth. So we differentiated between sunlight, twilight, and nightlight, between cloudy sky, slightly cloudy sky, clear sky, and very cloudy sky. We described the colors of the sky and the clouds, and classified and described the dynamics as either calm or dramatic. And we also described what borders the horizon. So you will notice that these descriptions are not necessarily objective, because one person's amber is another person's orange, and what is calm and what is dramatic is certainly debatable. But in the end, this is not that important as long as the description is consistent in itself. Calm is intended to name a similarity, so that later in a prompt it increases the probability of producing something that is similar to the learning material described in this way as calm. So the last page, please. This results in a rather complex network of labels and terms, which you can see here once again in a corresponding interface, which may make the system a little clearer. You can see the images on the left, or the predicates that were selected, to describe the selected image in the middle, and are the predicates that exist in the whole training data on the right. So this is what we used to train our AI, which can take quite a while depending on the scale and the computing power. And after that, you get this LoRa model that we could then finally put to use, which is what Martin will now be discussing.
And last but not least, some more technical insights. And having this trained LoRa model, we use the AI image generation system Stable Diffusion to get the images. Here you see the graphical user interface called ComfyUI that we use to control the image generation process within Stable Diffusion. The interface depicts the components of the AI image generation as a control flow graph. The boxes shown here are certain inputs, AI generation steps, image processing modules, and image outputs. The system allows you to build complex image generation workflows by combining the different models to get an output image. You can imagine it like putting wires between electrical components to get a circuit. In detail, here you see our image generation setup. We use the standard SDXL base model, added our trained LoRa model, as we showed, as Jakob showed, and added a textual description of what the image should contain or not contain. That's called prompts, and they come in positive and negative fashion. Then, to ensure that the created image includes the same composition and content of the black and white photograph, we use the so-called control net to take over the image structure. Therefore, an image version with an adapted gradient curve was used so that the clouds and the sky structures were highlighted and so went into the image generation process as well. The last box here on the right side is where the magic happens. The sampler takes all the input values and generates a new image. In our case, because we want to concentrate on the sky, as we mentioned, we put in post-processing part where we put a mask over the generated image so that we only have a look on the sky. In general, the whole image is generated because we figured out that the results are much more better when the AI system generates a whole image. As you might see already, there are many switches and complex parameters you could control to get a specific result. A common workflow, therefore, is to generate images, evaluate them due to the intended aim, and refine the result by adapting the parameters. A handy way to do that are so-called XY plots. that generates matrices of images due to different parameter values at once. For example, we did a variation of starting values, also known as seeds and prompts, to check the influence of our trained LoRa model to the resulting images. Here you see one, and I emphasize only one, generated sky reconstruction. As you see, the sky structures of the black and white image have been transferred to the resulting images. And on this slide, you see some more variations you get when you're changing the parameters. And having our trained LoRa model, it was possible for us to do some tests, to play around a little bit. On the left side, for example, you see variations we get by putting in different sky color gradients. We train with the Caspar David Friedrich images into the generation prompt, and by that get the proximity of the coloring of other Caspar David Friedrich images in these things, as you see, for example, the Tetschner Altar oder Frau vor der untergehenden Sonne, as yes, some tests here. We also did some experiments with Rast bei der Heuernte, like here, and with, in this matrix we added the also mentioned descriptions of Meyer-Abich from 1906 to the prompt to give the AI system further clues to create an image and to describe more color aspects for the AI system that could be used. So to conclude, we think that the AI-based image generation could be a useful tool for researchers. The power for us does not lie in creating the 100% correct reconstruction. But for us more, the power lies in having a simple generator for variations that include specific styles of artists or aspects and characteristics of images. In addition, complementation or improvement could be done more efficiently. To choose which of the variation is the best one to represent the certain state of research or opinion still is a task of the historian and art historian experts. In context of provenance research, there are some scenarios we think the existing system could be used to create needed images. For example, you have a low resolution image and want to alter the resolution that has a simple complexity, and there are some websites who already can do this. The second one is the scenario you just showed. You have a black and white image and you want to do a recoloration due to by a pre-trained model or such kind of LoRa model. In analogy, an analog complexity has, if you have a certain image and you want to replace some parts or reconstruct missing parts of the work. And the most difficult thing is if you have a scenario where you just have a detailed textual description of the destroyed or missing artwork, and you want to use a trained AI system to regenerate this image because you don't have any kind of clue what the image looked like, and so the variation you get is very wide. As you've seen, if you have the black and white image, the image structure could be used, and so it's much more easy. So yes, that's for our stand of research right now, and now, yeah. We are happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Well, I, for my part, I'm speechless. There's a question.
Thank you very much. My name is Karina Merseburger from the Dresden State Art Collections. Thank you very much for your talk. I have one question. Hopefully I can get it across. Let's say I get a tip of a possible war loss. We have a black and white photograph, and we also have, of course, the detailed descriptions of the catalogs in the 19th century. And we put them next to each other. The painting that has come about somewhere and our photograph. And so far we do this, of course, with the help of our restorers and of old photographs and so on. But I could imagine that AI could greatly help in establishing, is this just another version or a copy of the original, or is it really the work that we have lost? Is that correct?
That's a difficult question, because you need a system that is trained to do that. So you need, yes, indeed, images of the artist and how they worked in detail, and train the model so the model is able to, yes, answer your question. Because it depends on, or the AI system depends on likelihood and probabilities. And so the more alike the image you have is to the trained model, the more the system could say yes or no. But indeed, right now, I can assure you, art historians are needed. don't fear, because the AI system works with photographs, and you maybe have the chance to look at the originals, at pictures, and do the things art historians do if they evaluate if the thing is from this artist or from another artist. But I think the AI system could help you. And the more clear your task is, the better you could train such a model.
Yes. Please.
Thank you very much. That was really fascinating, and I think opens huge vistas or possibilities for kind of reconstructing images that have been destroyed. I wondered whether you had thought also about non-text forms of interaction. I have a colleague, for example, who works with using a sketch as an interface to kind of bring images or search for images, and also thinking about the other ways where your project is placed in terms of its computing approaches and connections with other parts of visual computing.
Yeah. So, as I showed in this flow graph, we use the black and white image because we have a photograph of this thing. And so it's very close to the original without the color information. If you just have a sketch of it, you could also put in a sketch and get a result combining the sketch thing and the things the AI system learned. Yeah, and so that would be another approach, to use this setup and put in the information or other kind of information to get a result. The variety would be broader because, yes, the sketch leaves more room for interpretation, even for the AI system, but in general, could be approached to combine these things.
And if I may add, when we started this little project, which is really just a sidekick, I had the hope that we could train the model by the composition principles that Friedrich used, which Werner Busch has shown over years of research. And I was hoping that through the knowledge of this, the composition principles, the AI would also be able to reconstruct basing on that. But right now that is not possible, or would require a lot of description work by us.
Right. Thank you very much.
Well, I think
one more question.
Whoa, one more. I missed you.
Sorry, Carolina Hüge, Provenance International. Thanks a lot. I see a great potential in AI as a tool in the future. But when it comes to AI, the outcome really much depends. The quality of the outcome really much depends on the quality of the input. And I was wondering, in the case of the two wanderers, what sort of reference did you have? Was it just a simple photograph? Was it a photograph from a catalog? And have you done any manipulation to the image itself beforehand, before you went on to proceed with the AI?
Maybe Jakob? Did you understand the question? Or?
Yeah, kind of. I'm not really sure. I think it's more a question to you, Clara. I think it's a black and white photograph from a catalog, I think. I'm not 100% sure. And yes, we did manipulation, as Martin managed. We used this black and white photo, but we also used a version with stronger contrast because the cloud structure is pretty delicate, and we wanted to have this as part of the control net output. Martin managed it. Control net is something that recognizes images, image structures, and uses them in the recomposition, so to say. And therefore, we manipulated the image. So, does it answer the question?
Yeah. I was wondering because, especially in the clouds, you can sort of vaguely see the streaks in the sky.
That's why we increased the contrast. That's why we
so when it comes to black and white, I guess that's the only sort of manipulation you could actually do is to put more contrast.
In our last project we were presenting in Munich, we had a lot of more photographs to start with, and we also had glass plate negatives from our collection, our archive. But you also have to take into account the reproduction of the medium itself. So the contrasts can be different, and you cannot really tell if something black and white or dark and light is really a certain color or not.
Yeah, so then the question is, if you have, for example, two, which one is more, let's say, contrast and one's less contrast, and then you both use them both as an input, how do you then reconcile as to what would be ring more true to the original?
So, as I told, this ComfUI system allows you to combine different components, and that component we used this control net takes the image structure. There are some things we could do, just a drawing from a picture, or a kind of black and white adaptation from images. And so if you figure out the right component, which allows you to just take the structure of the image into the image generation process, you could concentrate on that. And so the difficulty is to figure out which component should be used to get the right thing. Because if you don't do this, the image, or you need more textual description in the prompt to create an image. And by putting in these control net things, or at least reference images directly into this image generation process, the image could, or the AI generator has more cues on what should the result look like. And so if you think that the whole AI thing is a thing of probability and likelihood, the more like a thing is to what you put in, the more like the result is what you want, of that what you want. And so, yes, you have to figure out, and so, the base thing is varying, and look what the variations look like, and look what direction you could go.
I, for my part, see a strong likelihood of this conversation continuing over coffee.
Thank you very much for that.
Unless there's somebody who has a really burning question now. In that case, we've come to the end of the panel. Thank you.